I'm gonna explain why or where I am coming from, and but also why I choose to use pasifika, the term pasifika. And for me, theology is in this region we call pasifika. There were two significant historical moments. One is the institution of the Pacific Conference of Churches, and the second is the Pacific Theological College. The beginning of the PCC, Pacific Conference of Churches, was 1961. The first assembly was 1966. And the setting of whatever you call the foundation for PTC, Pacific Theological College, 1962. The first building, 1965. The first group of students, 1966. Why are they significant? Because for me, theology in the Pacific is about the churches. It's not about the academy. It's not about the worldwide intellectual society. It's about the churches, because the PCC was formed in order to bring the island churches together. It's about collaboration. So the PCC was formed in that spirit of connecting after because this conversation, even though it was started in 1961 in Malua, that assembly in Malua, the meeting in Malua, the conversation started in the 1950s after the Second World War. So the churches were organized in order to keep us connected. And I think for me, this is one of the important things for me to do, is to keep us connected. We have a lot of our theologies that are supremacist, if I can use that way, or separatist, like my theology. My Fijian theology is better from the Tongan theology. Actually, it's the other way around. It's the Tongans who think they are better than the rest of the region. That kind of theology loses sight of what is Pasifika for me. So it's about connection. It's about churches. That's what theology in the Pacific. And I continue to use this label Pasifika because this is the heritage that I come from, that I locate my work in, and I invite people. This is the first time, sorry, Brian, this is actually the first time I've kind of come out into the public and name this. And I hope that some theologians in the region will explain it. Because PTC, the Pacific Theological College, was built in order to make theology relevant for the region, for the islands of the Pacific. And you can see in their statement from the very beginning that that was the intention. So that was in a conversation in 1962 in Fiji, but before in the 1950s. If you look at contextual theology, the history of contextual theology, a lot of people will locate it somewhere else, and nobody from the region would advocate for how we were doing contextual theology in the 1950s. I mean, some people go to Taiwan, to Korea, Minjung, and some people go to the US, you know, those Catholic people there who think that they are the masters of contextual theology. And mainly because no one from our region, Brian, has written on how contextual theology happened in the 50s. And more importantly for me is that there were two significant themes in the 50s. Atomic test in Mururoa and independence. Yeah, the self-determination and independence were the spirit in which these two organizations were built in order to develop what we call Pacific theology. Okay. Unfortunately, nowadays we have forgotten about that legacy of the war, especially the atomic testing, and that's why I used that clip from the Marshall Islands. What's her name? Yeah, it was the clip that I assigned for today. That we need to, because the last US testing in the islands was 1960, actually 1984 was the French testing. So it's the legacy is still there, and the independence. Yeah, and the theologians have dropped that. So Samoa was first in 1962, right, Brian? 1962. Fiji was 1970. Papua New Guinea 1975, and others. Nauru was 1968. So self-determination and political independence from empires was very strong in the development of Pacific theology. And I encourage us to keep that in mind as we journey through this subject and our discussion. Where is our theological thinking in the context of atomic testing weapons? I mean, Australia just signed this contract with the UK, US UK, about the atomic. What do we say as theologians about that? But I want to remind you that there are some islands that are still under occupation. Yeah, West Papua, Kanaki, Mauhinui, Hawaii, Tutuila, Rapa Nui, and the two that that people don't talk about, the Cook Islands and Niue. Yeah, because they are, we don't see them as being under occupation because they are under the New Zealand government. Eh? But this is another thing for you to think about, because a lot of our islands are very proud of having independence. Having independence. Do you know what year the New Zealand was independent? There is no Independence Day for New Zealand, no Independence Day for Australia. So what does that mean? Yeah, are they still? They have they are sovereign nations, Aotearoa and Australia, but it doesn't mean that they are independent, officially independent yet. So this is part of why I continue to speak of doing theology in Pasifika. Until all of these, until all of these islands are independent, have self-determination, I want to continue reminding our world of this region called Pasifika. So for me, there are what I call currents. There are 4 currents in the doing of theology in Pasifika. And I'm gonna just name them. And there are 2 things that I'll be inviting you, especially those who are doing it for credit, but for everyone as well. For me, there are 4 currents thing in terms of a water world. I mean, there are 4 currents in doing theology. There are some theologies that are just focusing on what I call translate. So you have contextual theologies here. And you know that doing contextual theology comes for different reasons. There are some people who contextualize because they think, the teaching of Christianity or the scripture of Christianity is good, is healthy. Some people contextualize because they think that the white people's teaching is better and more, better for us. So therefore we contextualize it. Some people contextualize because they think that the local context, what our forefathers and foremothers taught were evil. Therefore, we need to take something. So why do we contextualize? Why we translate? The second current I call just transgress, dismantle. I think Ruth used the word unravel. I think will fit here. Some people do theology in order to transgress, but not just to transgress. See, this is where it comes into 2, the same current, but it breaks out into 2 streams. To transgress against the dark era of our forefathers and foremothers, and some people transgress against the teachings that have come from the West. So transgression is a current, but how you do it is different in different theologies. Others transcend. I use just that label. If you're familiar with Nasili's work, Nasili Vakauta, he used this alternative, alternative. So that Nasili's work falls into that attempt to transcend. And then there is that current to tolerate. In other words, not tolerate in the sense of saying, oh yeah, I accept, I agree, but tolerate in the sense, okay, come on board and I'll drive. Yeah, I'm the one who's going to drive. And the way I look at different theologies, they operate in these four, and some of them would have multiple currents in each of them. There'll be a little bit of contextualizing, there'll be a little bit of dismantling, a little bit of alternative, but they're not always clear on what they are trying to do. So what I'm inviting you, as you read the readings and listen to the videos and the clips, is try to think, what is this work trying to do? Is it trying to translate and contextualize? Or is it trying to provide an alternative? Is it trying to transcend? Or is it trying to drive the whole process? So these are, for me, four different currents that's operating in our in the theologies that's coming from Pasifika. So if those are okay, I'm going to put Ini now on the spot. I didn't assign, but I'll share your. Are you okay, Ini? I'll share your essay with everyone. The Sole Vaki. What's our time? I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, I think we're okay in terms of time. Where would you locate your work, Ini? Contextualize your Sole Vaki. Ini provided this form of, can I describe it, Ini?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's a community kind of work where people come together, and in their coming together, it's a process she calls Sole Vaki. Can you put that Sole? A way of, in Tongan, we have this, for the Tongans, we call it kautaha, where we work as a community. Where would you put? But it's not a community of the privileged. It's a community of just regular people, especially women. Where would you locate it, Ini? Contextual, dismantle, alternative, or tolerate?
I think there's a bit of contextualizing and what's the other one that you said? It's a bit of alternative as well.
Yeah.
Because it's reading outside of the mainstream.
Yeah.
It provides that, and it gives hopes to give voice to those who cannot speak or who are silent.
Right.
Those who are disadvantaged, those who sit outside of the normal normal circle, the village greens.
Yeah.
So that's what it's about. Yeah.
And I think most of the works that's coming out of the region would try to provide some alternative. Yeah. In these last 10 years or so, the works that came in the 60s and the 70s were highly translated, highly contextual, about just bringing what Bonhoeffer said or Barth said, and then, or John Wesley, I mean, those of us in the Wesleyan tradition, what they said, and bring in a local native concept in order to make it make sense for us. But now, as we have come up to in this era, we are beginning to provide alternatives and to tolerate. It's not rejectionist, but it's taking it and, okay, this is what John Wesley said, but okay, well, I need John Wesley because it gives me some credibility, but I'm going to drive the agenda. And there are some essays that I'll be showing. I know Brian and Mariana will have a chance to talk about their contribution as we go along, but it'd be good to think in terms of these four currents. Am I making sense? Yeah, any comments or questions? Okay, Ruth, and then Hiwan.
Yeah, I just was wondering with the fourth current, the toleration. I'm not sure I've quite got my head around it, but I wondered if there was a subversion that's happening within that, or it's not quite going that far in your mind, like that's more transgressive, or
Yeah, it is transgressive. Yeah, it is a dismantle. It's what's her name? You can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tool. So yeah, so there's this dismantling, but it's. Are you familiar with what's this movie? The Kung Fu Panda movie? Yeah,
I
it
wish
is.
I were.
Oh, but it's that kind of philosophy where you don't quite. You, I mean, it's aggressive, but you're using the energy and taking advantage of it. Yeah, what the missionaries have brought, we use it and take advantage. So toleration is about, it's not about rejection. Yeah. So if you see the alternative in the work of Nasili, for example, that his early works, that alternative is about saying, oh, this is better than that, therefore I don't need that. Yeah, these other works, I mean, you see this in, if you have a chance, when Brian eventually publishes his dissertation, it's taking this Palangi way of thinking and kind of it's all, for me it's about surfing. Yeah, you surf the wave. You can't reject the wave. If you go against a wave, you're gonna drown or you're gonna get ripped. So it's a way of learning to surf. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
He
I think my question was around contextualize or translate.
Yeah.
But could you also use that to transgress or to dismantle?
Yeah. They're all connected, Hiwan. Yeah, they're all connected. But I'm just using these currents to see, or maybe flows or the spirit in which you do your work and what you are, and they're all connected. Yeah, to contextualize includes tolerate. But in my case, and in my observation on theologies and hermeneutics from pasifika, these are the four trends. These are the four trends that are quite. At the same time, there are still some theologies that are still Western, Palangi and Pakeha and White. That's coming from the region. Yeah, but but I want to highlight that being contextual is different for different. Yeah, means different spirit from each of the practitioners. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. Dismantling patriarchy. There you go. Thank you, Brian. So this is for me the this thing that I call pasifika. Theologies of the Pacific are coming from these four different currents. What I'm going to do now is shift a little to this other label that's popular in the region. If I can share it. Oceania. Okay. So you're probably familiar with Peli Hauofa. Born in Tonga, grew up in Papua New Guinea, and lived in Fiji for the majority of his life. And he passed away and is buried in Fiji. He's the one that made Oceania popular. And his tribe, I mean, this quote, we should not be defined by the smallness of our islands, but in the greatness of our oceans. We are the sea, we are the ocean. Oceania is us. So his Oceania thing is about being connected. Yeah, the islands are connected and we are a sea of islands. Okay. So his work was published in 1993. But remember that being connected was the reason why the Pacific Conference of Churches was established. It's just that Hauofa is published his views And he's now attributed for the guy who made the connection with the islands of the region. And none of our church folk published and explained the reason why the Pacific Conference of Churches was established. And I think, 1961, 1993, it's just, but the main problem there is that our church folk don't enter into the conversation in the academy, and therefore our insights are lost. Yeah, and because Peli has done it, it becomes the authority. Now, I'm hoping maybe Michael, one of these students can come and do a PhD and reclaim that Oceania and being connected was part of our journey, but it needs to be highlighted and not be lost because of how Offa's work from '93. But I'm going to transgress how Offa's work a little bit. When he talks about Oceania, he's talking about the islands in the southern side of Oceania. When I speak of Oceania, I see the islands in Oceania. And that, for me, if you see here, it includes the Philippines. It includes Indonesia, the islands of Indonesia. Because the indigenous Indonesians see themselves more as Polynesians rather than Asians. So when I speak of Oceania, I want to push the limit up north. And that's why we use this artwork to publicize this unit. And these two works, I mean, a lot of people question my using of work by Emmanuel Garibay, Filipino. Why do I use a Filipino artist in my work, which I call pasifika? But it's also because of the Oceania element in my own work, because I consider him to be one of the natives of Oceania, even though he's up north. So how Offa open up, okay, two things. How Offa open up the region to the islands and bringing the islands together. The bringing the islands together was part of what our churches were doing in the 1960s. And we in the Pacific, or Pasifika, need to find ways to reconnect with those who are now part of Asia. And that is one of the challenges that I think that we as Pasifika people, thinkers, readers need to do.